Hello, hello, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being with us. We're going to get started in just a second. We'll give others an opportunity to join the call. But as you get in and get settled, inviting you all to please mute yourself. And in the few minutes that we take just to allow others to join the call, inviting you all to grab a drink, get settled, use the restroom, get comfortable, all that good stuff. We'll get started in just a moment. I'm going to repeat myself a few times because I know that folks are joining us at different times. So again, thanks so much for being with us today, folks. Welcome. We'll get started in just a moment, inviting you all to just remain on mute for a second. And in the time it takes for folks to join the call and get settled, feel free to use the restroom, grab a drink, grab a snack, get comfortable, and we'll get started in just a moment. Oh, this is great. I'm seeing some names that I recognize. That's awesome. Good to see you, friends. I'm excited to have everyone else on the call as well. Excited to meet some new people. For those just joining, we're going to get started in just a second. Just wanted to invite you all to make sure that you're on mute. Feel free to grab a drink, grab a snack. We are recording today's call, which I will repeat again in our housekeeping notes, but just wanted to flag that for you all. Okay. All right, I think with that, we're about 46 participants right now. We'll go ahead and get started and others can join us when they can. So, all right, hello, welcome again, everyone. Really excited to be with you all today. My name is Juan Serrano, use he, him pronouns. I'm the Director of Content and Training here at Equity in the Center. I want to let you know I'm calling in from Mexica territory, which is land otherwise known as Mexico City. Inviting everyone on the call to share your name, your organization, and where you're calling in from as well in the chat. I think it's important, and I think it's also just fun to get a sense of who is in the room. And so it's a real pleasure to be with you all today. I know we at Equity in the Center are beyond excited to announce our newest program, the Race Equity Cycle Pulse Check Cohort. And for the potential opportunity to partner with you all to advance racial equity at your respective organizations. But before we get into that, I want to do two things. I'm going to share some more housekeeping notes, and then I'm going to invite my colleagues who are also on the call to introduce themselves. But her first housekeeping note, again, is to request that you remain on mute, and that will help us hear the speaker and track the conversation at all points. We've got anticipating a lot of folks to join us, and we just want to make sure that we are tracking the conversation. Also, inviting you to be on camera if you can, though of course we acknowledge that sometimes life doesn't always make that easy or even possible to do so. So no pressure at all, just an open invitation for all those willing. And whether you're on video or not, we're inviting you to engage with us today throughout the call by emoting, reacting. You can do so at the bottom of your screen. You should see like a little like functions bar, and there's a reactions button there. Also, if you want to get our attention, you can raise your hand. That'll be particularly helpful during our Q&A section, for which we've reserved about 20 minutes at the end of the call. Finally, want to remind you all that we are recording this, and that's for posterity's sake. We want to make sure that we can include this recording in our follow-up email, which we will be sending in 2 days, this Thursday, which is actually the same day we're launching the application. So you will receive a follow-up email with this recording, and then we'll also post this recording on our dedicated page on our website. So just wanted to bring all of that to your attention. Again, thanks so much for being with us. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our president, Carrie-Ann Suarez, to invite herself, and then I'll ask Kay to invite our other colleagues on the call as well. Okay.
Thanks, Juan. Good afternoon and good morning, depending upon where folks are. I'm Carrie-Ann Suarez, and I've been with Equity in the Center since the end of 2016. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and thanks for joining to learn a bit more about our new cohort program. I'm joining from the land of the Piscataway and the Metro DC area, and I am going to toss it to my colleague, Mia, to introduce themselves.
Hello, good morning, afternoon. My name is Mio. I use they, them pronouns. I am on Kanaka Maoli land on Hawaii Island. I am the training associate here with Equity in the Center. And last but not least, I'm pass it over to Mara as well.
Good morning, excuse me, good morning, good afternoon, folks. My name is Mara. I use she, they pronouns. I'm calling in from the traditional land of Dakota and Anishinaabe people, also known as Minneapolis, Minnesota. Also here to support tech for the call today. So invite you all to direct message Mio or myself if you're needing any support, accessibility requests, anything like that. So with that, I will pass it back to Juan.
Amazing. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate that. And before I pass it back over to Kay, here are some photos of Kay and I. I just want to give us a quick preview of our time together. So we started with our welcome and intros. In just a moment, Kay will walk us through the race equity cycle, provide an overview for that. And then she will also overview our pulse check assessments. Then it's back over to me. I'm going to speak about our cohort components. So we're going to talk about our desired outcomes, ideal candidates. We'll also talk about what some of the time commitments look like. And then we'll do some timelining, both in terms of the application process and the cohort experience overall. And then we'll wrap up today with some Q&A. So jam-packed, protein-rich hour. But with that, I will toss it over to Kay to walk us through the race equity cycle.
Thanks, Juan. And I think most folks on the call, if they're here, are probably somewhat to very familiar with the race equity cycle. So I'm just going to voice over it quickly and talk a little bit about our intent in creating it. So when we started doing the research for what became the 2018 publication, this cycle was a line that went from diversity to inclusion to equity. And we very quickly threw that out because, as we all know from home and work, change is not linear. So it became a cycle, and our aspiration was to cast a vision for what it looks like to center equity cross-functionally in an organization, and then to also cast a path forward sort of to that vision through the race equity cycle. So we designed it to be hopefully as intuitive as possible in terms of resonating with folks' experience of working inside of organizations. And what we also wanted to do was give very detailed action steps that folks could then implement based on where they currently are in the race equity cycle to make that shift from awake to woke or woke to work. And so that's where the bullet points and each of the matrices for the 7 levers come in. We hope that folks would adopt those essentially as action steps to move through the race equity cycle. And awake, as many of you probably know, is the very beginning of the work where organizations are focused transactionally on representation alone. So focused on counting folks of different identities. In this case, we're talking about race or race and ethnicity. But at this stage, an organization would be focused on counting all folks from, quote, historically underrepresented backgrounds and having really explicit intentional language about the need to recruit folks of, quote, diverse backgrounds to the institution, but that's where their thinking about the work really stops. They want to pull diverse individuals into the organization, but little to no consideration is given to the experience of those individuals once they are working in the institution. And there is more often than not data available on the disparity between the retention of folks of color in an organization relative to their white peers, but no energy is devoted to figuring out what's lying beneath that disparity, which is really the organization's culture. So here, folks have a very explicit focus on diversity and DEI versus equity. They're focused on recruiting, pulling folks into the organization. There is general acknowledgement and understanding that white dominant culture is the culture of the day, so to speak, in the institution, and folks are expected to assimilate to that. That is the case whether or not the organization, we found in our research, whether the organization is predominantly white, and also when the organization is predominantly folks of color. And that is the case when an institution is led by someone who identifies as a person of color, as well as when an institution is led by someone who identifies as white, because we're all part of this broader American society that upholds white dominant culture as the standard. So to make that shift from transactional to transformational, as we increasingly say, organizations will acknowledge the existence of structural racism, the existence of white dominant culture, and their contribution to perpetuating it. And that's when organizations begin to make that shift from awake to woke. At the awake stage, organizations also believe both explicitly and implicitly that it's the responsibility of, quote, diverse individuals to support the institution and often their white colleagues in developing an understanding of how race and racism operates. That's an important shift. An important shift happens around that belief as an organization moves into the woke stage. So at the woke stage, the organization is acknowledging the existence of structural racism, acknowledging that their institution mirrors it, replicates, and perpetuates it in their internal organizational culture, practice, policy, process. And they're making an explicit commitment then to undo that. So as the People's Institute might say, to undo racism. And an important shift that happens is the institution's acknowledgement that it is not the responsibility of people of color generally, or the people of color inside of the institution to do the lion's share of the work to center equity in the organization's process. It's the responsibility of all of us. In particular, it's the responsibility of folks who are privileged within a system of white supremacy. So at the woke stage, that's when you begin to see organizations doing equity audits, bringing in consultants to help them reframe cross-functionally all of their culture, policy, process, practice to center equity. You'll also often see affinity groups or caucuses across racial identities. It's important that those groups be made available to folks who identify as white as well as folks who identify as being of color. Because if you only offer affinity space to folks who identify as being as people of color, it sort of builds on the implicit belief that race is a problem that we folks of color have to deal with and lead the response in terms of the organization. So the woke stage is the longest an organization can stay in this stage, for up to 10 years, where we found organizations will stay in the awake stage sometimes for on average 3 to 5, because the woke stage is where the organization is doing a complete 180, not just changing the way that the organization looks in terms of representation, which was the focus at the awake stage, but changing the organization's culture, the way that it operates. So truly operationalizing equity. And the work stage, which is not the end because it's a cycle, and the work continues forever, whether you are at the work stage or at the woke stage. But the work stage is where an organization has successfully built and is sustaining a race equity culture. Equity would have been operationalized to the extent that as senior leaders leave, as folks on the board, as the CEO, as the senior team leaves, as middle managers leave, the race equity culture is sustained because it is so embedded in the organization's DNA, so to speak, or in their organizational policy practice process. There are internal systems of redundancy. And part of that is that no one is employed at the institution who does not have the competency to operationalize equity within the scope of their role. So that's part of how an institution sustains a race equity culture. And at the work stage, when an organization, for example, might release a public statement on a tragedy in the community, whether it's the crisis at the border, the murder of an unarmed Black man, SCOTUS rulings, for example, the values of racial and social justice that they profess in their public statements actually match the values that are held at the center of their organizational culture on a daily basis. And that was a huge disparity that showed up in the summer of 2020 when thousands of organizations released statements using words and professing values that they absolutely did not hold at the center of their culture every day. So I'll stop there and we'll transition to giving a little snapshot of the program itself. And there are 7 levers, as I mentioned. I'm not going to dive into them, but most organizations spend the earliest stages of their work with us and just in general in terms of building a race equity culture focused on the organizational culture, the senior leaders, and the board of directors lever. That's where most organizations direct their attention to start. Thanks, Juan. So in terms of the overview, we created the Race Equity Pulse Check to be just that, a pulse check, a way for an organization to get a sense of where they are on the race equity cycle. It's not it's not an equity audit. It's not a survey of all your staff with all of the data disaggregated. It's a way to get a snapshot of where you are in the race equity cycle so that you can then begin the work of navigating through the race equity cycle or deepen your existing work. And it is designed to be a team assessment. And we provide some pretty clear guidelines, and some of you may have already read the user guide on who needs to participate in the organizational team to ensure that the tool is completed in as accurate a way as possible. So there's got to be a really explicit and intentional analysis of power, of identity, of voice in pulling together that team so that more mid-level folks and junior folks feel as comfortable as possible within the boundaries of race and power as they operate to talk honestly about where the organization is in terms of its work. The types of organizations that should complete the pulse check, the majority of organizations that have completed the pulse check are between 20 and 50 staff members. So we do have some folks who have teams of less than 10 that have completed it, and we do have some organizations that are more than 100 that have completed it, but it seems to be a tool that resonates most with like small to mid-sized teams. We have also had some for-profits completed, but the majority of the folks who have completed it are from the nonprofit sector. And in terms of who should complete the assessment, as I mentioned, it should be, and this is detailed in the user guide, a cross-functional representation of the organization from the top to the bottom in terms of seniority. So from the most senior folks down to the most junior members of the team, and someone from each of the institution's verticals should be present so that someone can speak to or give insight into the breadth of operations from, like internal operations to external program facing work, as well as from the perspective of more senior leaders and more internal junior folks who are executing as opposed to leading externally potentially. And I will toss it over to Juan.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Kay. And folks, with that sort of foundational understanding of what the race equity cycle is and what the pulse check is, I think we are ready to sort of dive into some of the components of what this fellowship or this cohort experience is going to look like. And so, as I mentioned in our intro, I'll discuss our desired outcomes, who we think are ideal candidates, and then we'll talk about some time commitments and what the timeline actually looks like. So in terms of what we hope to achieve, first, for starters, we're hoping that every participating organization will complete the pulse check assessments. And then based on the strategic recommendations that you're given, we're hoping to help you develop and implement a racial equity action plan. And throughout the process, We'll be facilitating opportunities for the cohort to build relationship and exchange best practices, because we understand that nurturing a community is really important for sustaining this work, and then also for just growing our impact as a sector. Ideally, candidates would have demonstrated a commitment for, or a commitment to, and a capacity for advancing racial equity. And that could look like a number of things. One, having a DEI or racial equity committee with authority and responsibility. It could include having a racial equity action plan, having strong relationships with community, having done some sort of, baseline equity analysis or audit internally. So just organizations who have been doing this work for quite a while are going to be the ones that we're looking for, and who will ultimately get the most out of this. I mentioned another, I think, criteria for ideal candidates is, again, org team authority and responsibility to be able to champion racial equity. And then also expressed investment from your leadership to participate and implement the recommended strategies. All of those are super important for us because, we want to actually be able to act on the results that we're given and ultimately transform our organizations. In terms of the time commitments, there will be 3 retreats. And there will actually be 2, not 3, 4-hour training days per retreat occurring on subsequent weeks. So what that looks like is, for example, you will have the first opening retreat in late September. I think it's September 27th is the day that we start. And then the following week, you will have the second retreat day, which is another 4-hour session. Also, you'll have to dedicate time to completing the race equity cycle pulse check assessment. That will take a few hours with you and your cross-functional team to complete that. There will be 2 rounds of organizational team coaching, and that will happen in between retreats. So between the opening and midpoint retreats, you'll have 1 round of coaching, and this is for the participating cohort members. And then the second round will happen between the midpoint and the closing retreat. For organizations and their staff who are not participating in the cohort, there will be 2 options for an awake to work open enrollments. And that's where they will learn more about the race equity cycle and some of our specific levers. Kay mentioned them before. So organizational culture, senior leaders, board of directors, and data levers. So we'll dive into those. And again, this is for your organizations to get a sense of what the Awake to Woke to Work framework is, and be able to understand some of the recommendations that you all will be leading them through as a result of the pulse check completion. And then also you'll need to dedicate some time between our retreats and our coaching sessions to actually be able to complete the assignments to act on those recommendations. And so wanted to share this time commitment with you all up front so you know exactly what you're getting into. And what this looks like on terms of a timeline, starting in the top left corner. So September 27th is when we will launch the cohort experience. And we're entitling that opening retreat, The Foundations of Racial Equity. October is when your organizations will be completing the pulse check assessments. And then this is option A for the organization staff who are not a part of the cohort experience to attend an open enrollment to get a sense of what the framework is. November, December, and January, we're dedicating to org team coaching. And then February, we'll have our midpoint retreat where we're advancing those racial equity strategies. You will have completed the assessment. You'll have those strategies at that point. And so that midpoint retreat will be really about interpreting those results and then thinking about the ways to implement the recommendations. March is also for org team coaching, and then it's option B for the open enrollment. And then we'll close out the retreat, the cohort experience in April. And we're entitling that closing retreat, Sustaining a Racial Equity Culture. And so this is a 7-month long cohort experience There's a lot happening in that amount of time. And also just want to bring your attention to the dates below. So the opening retreat dates are September 27th and October 4th. Midpoint retreats are the 14th and 19th of February, and then the closing retreats April 10th and April 15th. Each of those dates, it will be from 12 to 4 p.m. Eastern. For the application, so we are launching the application, super excited for this, this Thursday, the 20th, and it will remain open for about 5 weeks, or actually 4 weeks, until Friday, August 18th at end of day. That's 11:59 p.m. Eastern. And so we're hoping that that's enough time to be able to complete this application. The application itself is pretty long. It's about 5 sections, and I would say you should probably reserve about 45 minutes to 1 hour to complete it. I want to be very clear that this is a group opportunity. It's not for single applicants. And so on the form, while one person would complete it, there is a section at the end that's going to ask you to provide the names of the other organizational team members who will be participating alongside you in the cohort. There's an option if you don't have those folks' names yet, so you can indicate that, but it would be really helpful if you could have those folks prepared by the time that you submit your application. So again, want to save about 45 minutes to an hour to complete that. We're also offering an application office hour. So if you have any specific questions to complete it, we're offering that 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern on August 2nd. So hope to see you all there. And I think, yeah, let's talk about costs. So price to participate in the cohort experience is based on a sliding scale model, and this is inspired by our friends at the Rockwood Leadership Institute. And so you have 5 columns here that reveal the different tiers of pricing. So for nonprofits with budgets below $1 million, the price is $5,000. For nonprofits with budgets between $1 and $4 million, and also government applicants, it's going to be $6,500. For foundations that have less than $10 million, that's going to be $9,000. For foundations over $10 million, it's $11,000. And then for all for-profit companies who are applying, it's a standard $15,000. Also, we are offering to cover a partial or a full scholarship for 2 applicants, and it's needs-based. And so if cost is a barrier for you all, not to worry, you can indicate so on your application. Want to be clear, however, that those scholarships are available for nonprofits only, and for nonprofits who are below $1 million. And a link to apply for that scholarship will be on the cohort application. It will also be on the dedicated webpage on our website for the Race Equity Cycle Pulse Check. So these are our prices, hoping it works for you all. And with that, I think we're going to use the rest of our time, which is great. We have about 30 minutes for some Q&A. So I will stop sharing here and inviting you all to share your questions either by raising your hand, and we can bring your voice into the space, and we can also, you can also feel free to share your questions in the chat. And I'm seeing that we already have a few there. So, Kay, how about we start with the ones in the chat, and then we will start to invite some voices. But first question I'm seeing is from Sebastian. Does the application have to be completed in one sitting, or can progress be saved and returned to later? Yes, it's a long application, so we definitely wanted to be able to allow you to save your progress and return to it later. From Wendy, how many organizations will be in a cohort? So we're looking between 5 to 6 organizations, somewhere around there. And each organization, we're hoping to have about 5 to 6 participating org team members. From Lisa, do you anticipate offering this cohort opportunity again? We have a conflict for one of the opening retreat dates, but this seems like an amazing opportunity. Kay, did you want to speak to this one? It's from Lisa in the chat.
Sure. Thanks for the question. This is our first time offering it, so we weren't exactly sure what the response would be, but we will offer it again. And based on the number of folks that have expressed interest, once we review the applications, there's a possibility that we might select future dates and then offer folks admission to a later start time. So once all of the applications are in and we have a chance to look at the organizations and try to balance the cohorts as much as possible so that the organizations we're bringing together are at similar positions or points in the work, which we found based on our past cohort experience that really amplifies the experience for folks. When we reach out to folks, there's a chance that some people might be admitted for the next cohort. But yes, we will have future dates, but we haven't calendared them at this point.
Appreciate that, Kay. And thanks, Mio and Mara, for flagging that we had questions earlier. So I'm going to actually lift up some of those. I'm not sure who asked it, but there was a question: is everything virtual? And the answer is yes. However, we are including on the application, the application form, just a general question to see if folks would be interested in doing something in person. If there was interest, it would likely be towards the end of the fellowship, but we are planning on the front end for it to be entirely virtual. Another question was, will these slides be available after the session? We'd love to share them with our leadership team. The slides will not be available after, however, the recording will. So inviting you to share the link to the recording with your leadership team or direct them to the dedicated webpage for the Race Equity Cycle Pulse Check cohort, which will include the application and today's recording, and that'll be available as early as this Thursday. Okay. I think I covered all the questions. Oh, thanks, Kay. Yeah, we can share the slides for the program overview and timeline and the pricing. But we won't be able to share the race equity cycle slide itself due to IP. Mara and Mio, if I missed any questions, feel free to let me know.
One, could you repeat how many orgs you're taking in the first cohort?
Yeah, so we're looking for between 5 and 6 organizations to participate in the first cohort. I think there was actually another question about like how many org team members, like what's the max? Between 5 and 6 as well. So we're looking at between 25, 35 participating cohort members representing those different organizations. And I think that will help us really, one, like cultivate a like intimate group, but also to make sure that we are able to help coach and build capacity to implement the recommended strategy. So 25 to 35 participants total is, I think, our sweet spot. Okay, would you like to add some context to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to, I think, was it Zelma? Apologies if I'm Zelma, if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. So I would encourage you to put down the number of individuals that make sense for your organization based on the guidelines in the user guide. And we'll sort of evaluate everybody on a case-by-case basis. You know, obviously, if you're like us, a team of less than 10, then you're not going to be sending a team of 10 people, but send the team that makes sense for you. In terms of the teams that do the best and get the most out of our cohort programs, they're the teams who are the most committed and aligned and authorized within the scope of the organization to carry this work forward. I would not recommend that you put someone on your team to whom you're making the case that this is work that should be done. So the folks who should be part of this team are champions, but people who within the scope of their role are authorizers and executors. because that's going to put you in the best position to complete the tool and then to carry the recommendations forward. And where organizations struggle in programs like this is when they are not aligned or with authorizers and implementers. That does mean that outside of this group of 5 to 6 or however many people you bring, your broader organization has to have authorized this work. And that's what we mean by, like, it wouldn't make sense for an organization to participate if someone within the organization is going to throw a wrench into the aligned forward movement that this group is going to try to execute coming out of this program. And so that can provide, hopefully will provide a little bit of insight into like what we're looking for and what's the organizational context that would make this a good fit for you. The folks who have done the best are those who, coming out of meetings, our sort of cohort meetings, can then go back, plan among themselves, and actually carry things forward and not get stuck in the loop of trying to make the case that the work you're trying to do is an actual thing that should be done. Now, if you'd like to use this as part of an effort to make the case at your organization, which I know some folks in our network do, that's something that we could consider, or we would consider, but we're really looking for folks who are going to be able to move forward with the recommendations that Juan was mentioning. Thanks, Juan.
No, thank you, Kay. That's super important context. And I actually think that that addresses Mia's question as well around specific representation we'd like to see on teams. Also encouraging, teams that are racially, ethnically diverse as well to participate in the cohort. How many people for the cost of the training can be part of the training? Is this question referring to our open enrollments for the org teams who are not a part of the cohort experience, or is this price to participate in the cohort? I'm not actually sure. And thanks, Mara, acknowledging a hand is raised as well. So just wanted to ask clarity for that person that asked the question, how many people for the cost of training can be part of the training? Okay, we can come back to that one. And I'm seeing a hand from Okusua. And please, if I'm saying your name wrong, please correct me.
You did a great job. So I was wondering, like, if you could pull up the timeline again. And so you just mentioned the open enrollment piece, and I was a little confused about what that means for people who are not a part of the cohort. And then my second question was about the recommendations from taking the pulse check. So I'm familiar with like the intercultural development inventory and how they like give you a development plan based on where you land at a certain point. So are the recommendations tailored to your organization, or are they standard recommendations based on where you score in the pulse check? I know I asked a lot of questions if you need me to repeat any of them.
That's great. Thank you so much for asking them. I'll take the first one and pass it over to Kay for the second in terms of the pulse check assessment recommended strategies. So displaying here once more the timeline for the cohort. And so we're offering 2 organization-wide open enrollment sessions. And so what Equity in the Center offers is it's our flagship training. It's based on our publication, Awake to Woke to Work. It's grounded in the race equity cycle, which Kay started the call providing an overview with. And so we are offering that to your org teams who are not participating in the cohort. So this is an opportunity for people who are not in the cohort to get a sense of what is the race equity cycle, what are our 7 levers, and based on the recommended strategies provided in the pulse check, it provides sort of a broader context and just helps level set some of the terminologies that are used. So we're offering those. The two options again are in October and in March. So the goal is for as many folks from your respective organizations to attend one of those two options, again, to help really drive this like organization-wide push. And I'll pass it over to Kay for your question regarding some of the recommended strategies.
Thanks, Juan. So the recommendations that you get are based, as Juan said, on your pulse check assessment score. They are not customized, for example, to your organizational context, as they would be if you were working with a consultant who did an assessment and then provided you with recommendations. So based on how you score on the pulse check, you'll be provided with recommended next step strategies just based on our overall body of research, but not based on what's actually happening at your organization beyond the answers that you provided in the pulse check. That would be for you and the organizational team to customize as part of carrying the work forward, and hence the cadence of meetings between the cohort meetings and the coaching sessions. That's something which you could really dive into and what the coaching sessions are designed for. So this is our report. These 3 strategies were recommended. These are the 3 to 5 points that will help Juan and I, or whichever of us is on the call, understand the broader organizational context, and then we can talk through that. But the report itself is not going to reflect your organizational context beyond the score. The reason that we have the organization-wide Awake to Work session as part of the program goes back to what I said before about the people who are the best fit for this opportunity. It's organizations that really have a commitment to action and to carrying forward the work using the race equity cycle framework. If a group of folks participate in experience like this, and then they come away with a report and an action plan, and the vision, the hope is for you at the end of the program to essentially have taken the race equity cycle pulse check assessment and then created an action plan to move forward based on that, which would reflect your organizational context. Our vision is for you all to actually be able to implement it. If you have no buy-in for the race equity cycle, no understanding of the framework, the shared language beyond the 5 to 6 people who participate in this cohort program, the likelihood that you will implement the action plan is, to be frank, slim to none. And that's why the broader engagement of the organization, the development of a shared language, clarity on how the cohort program you're participating in connects to that open enrollment session and to what comes next, all of that is critical to the success of the work. And so as much as you can in the application, talk about your ability to lean into that to drive momentum. That will demonstrate that your organization is a good fit. And going back to what I said earlier about people who are ready to take action versus people who are trying to make the case, there is space for people who are making the case to be part of the cohort program, but there has to be a bias for action, because the open enrollment sessions in which your broader colleagues would participate, that is to some extent a case-making exercise. Developing a shared language, casting a vision for the work, helping people to understand how they fit into it. So hopefully that addresses your questions.
And Kay, we had a follow-up question about org team representation in the cohort. So the question is, they had an organization of 12 people. Is it possible to have all 12 participate in the org team?
I think that's too many people. If it would be helpful to have like a short conversation, offline about why you think, based on what you've read in the user guide, that would make sense for you, that's something that we could do. I do know of some organizations that have gotten groups of 12 people together to complete the assessment. It's outside of our recommendations. Those people were using the completion of the assessment as a case-making tool and as an education tool. So we did design the tool such that participating in it helps give you some insight into what it is that you say you want to do, if that makes sense. And so there have been a number of organizations that have required or solicited participation broadly beyond kind of the handful of folks that we recommend as an education exercise. My initial, I guess, knee-jerk or initial response to the question would be that a smaller group should be part of the organizational team, and potentially all 12 folks could attend the coaching sessions. I think you need to think hard about the utility of having that many people complete an assessment. Do you think that having that many people present will actually make the answers more accurate? Or is your goal something else, like case making or education with some of the other folks I know that had, I mean, somebody had like 25 people in there. So, you know, like they're bored. So, you know, if you'd like to have a separate conversation, I know they'll follow Juan's email will be shared at the end, and you could follow up and have a conversation. But my short answer would be no, but yes to the coaching.
Appreciate that, Kay. Just wanted to flag for folks that we're going to take these questions and put them in an FAQ document, and we'll follow up with that in our email on Thursday as well. So we have that to look forward to. I think there was another question that we didn't answer yet, which was, are all the cohort team members expected to participate in each retreat and coaching session? Yes, the goal is to have everyone there for each retreat and each coaching session. However, we understand that sometimes schedules don't always allow for that. So we're hoping for the majority of your team to be able to be at all of our retreats and our coaching sessions to ensure continuity's sake. But again, we want to be flexible for folks as emerging needs arise and things like that. And also with regards to coaching, as Kay mentioned in our last response, we could be flexible in terms of who the best people to attend those calls in order to make the case, to advance the work, etc.
There's a question from Laura. I can address that if you want.
Yeah. Go for it, Kay.
So does the pulse check identify organizational bias? I'm not totally sure what you mean by organizational bias. You could mean the bias of senior leaders who think that what they think is how things are, or you could mean institutional racism or bias in that sense. So I'm not really sure. We do address, and you can drop more context in the chat if you'd like, we do address in the user guide the limitations of a team-based assessment because of institutional bias and basically how power and race operate within teams. So we're very clear that this is an assessment that's completed within the boundaries of a space that's influenced by power and race in a way that may make some answers less accurate. And so we encourage you to build the team in such a way that those conversations can be as honest and transparent as possible. And what we find when talking to organization about their results is that we do push them on whether or not the things that may have been painted more rosily are true given other responses on the survey, which indicate that that may not be completely accurate. So I don't like to call this a self-assessment because it's not an assessment of self. It's an organizational assessment. It's a team assessment. But the boundaries of it, the limitations of it are the fact that you all are getting together and doing it yourself. And if I'm the CEO and I think ABC and I come in the room and I say that, that will shift what's in the room no matter what we say in the user guide. And that's just honest. So the way the assessment is structured is that the results can surface disparities in responses. And we encourage folks to talk through that in the coaching and in the follow-up, because we all know junior folks may not be as comfortable pushing back on what the senior team says is a really excellent command of how microaggressions operate in the staff, in the workplace. And what our data at least is showing is that's completely not the case. for organizations that have a public commitment to equity, that it's on their website, it's, you know, begun to be thread into organizational policies, the way that race operates and power operates in team meetings and within the organization, like bias is present. So we do try to surface that through the assessment and the follow-up. Juan, do you want to add something?
No, appreciate it, Kay. Just flagging for you. We also have another question from Chiara. What about nonprofits which are mostly volunteer-based and driven?
Core, I don't know if you're a core type nonprofit, but we've worked with some of those before and had a couple of those participate in the pulse check. It's important that you have the individual that oversees the volunteer core participate. It would also be important for you to have an individual who is a volunteer but not in a leadership role participate. So I'd encourage you to apply the same kind of logic that you're applying to trying to get a broader perspective reflected within the organizational team. So you want to have some mid-level and some junior folks. So as much as possible, have someone who could reflect the experience of individuals in the volunteer ranks, as well as someone who is potentially the program manager overseeing the volunteers, if that makes sense. Especially if those volunteers are a critical lever for how your programs or your work is executed, because they're essentially an arm of the organization. And what we've found generally, and this has been discussed sort of in the nonprofit sector, is that there's often a significant disparity among volunteers because they generally don't receive capacity building on how to do their work with an equity lens. That's begun to change in a lot of organizations, but you would want to try to surface any disparities that exist between your volunteer staff, so to speak, and your organizational team.
Thanks, Kay. Appreciate you. Wanted to answer two other questions from Mia, just to put voice to it in case folks didn't see them in the chat. But again, the retreats there are 3 retreats: an opening, a midpoint, and a closing retreat. Each retreat consists of 2 training days that happens on subsequent weeks. So it's a Thursday, and then, for example, the following Thursday. And each retreat day is 4 hours long, from 12 to 4 p.m. Eastern. And then there are 2 rounds of coaching. Those are between the retreats. So round 1 of coaching is going to happen between November, December, and January. Each coaching call is an hour long. And then round 2 of coaching is going to happen in March, just before our closing retreat. So we have about 8 minutes left. I think we have time for some more questions. Again, super appreciate the ones you all are raising and the engagement thus far. What else can we help clarify and address before we wrap for today? From Okosua, is that 1 session per month or 1 coaching session for each round? That's 1 coaching session per organization per round. How's the team being supported throughout the process? What supports are in place to respond after the pulse check, hold space for ourselves and for the team? So in the retreats, we will have some collective learning, and then we'll have some breakout spaces to help folks process according to their organizations. We'll do some internal sort of clustering according to some themes that we are seeing. So the support you will have in our retreats will be, a mix of collective and individual. Our coaching is the place where we are tailoring our support based on your specific organizational context and the results that you are given from the pulse check. And while we do have like 1 hour per coaching session per round, there are other things that we can do. For example, we can help you all think through how you might communicate the results that you're given to the rest of your team. But it is largely the support that we give is largely limited to those coaching and retreat times. Kay, would you like to speak to some other supports that we could offer? And I know sometimes we're flexible given our other cohort experiences as well.
We have done for cohort participants additional coaching sessions, for example, like with their board or with their entire staff. And the coaching is a really flexible word. So we can provide whatever facilitation is needed within certain boundaries because we're not doing a consulting engagement, for example. But when teams thought that it would be helpful, for example, for us to do a call with their senior team or with their C-suite, to talk about what their group was doing, or in another coaching session, I facilitated like a short version of the Awake to Woke to Work training for a participating foundations board. We can do that, and that just comes at an additional cost. We don't do consulting engagements, so anything additional is going to be within those coaching boundaries. But coaching is pretty flexible. Like we can facilitate with any group that would help you to move the work along and specifically to advance whatever goals you're setting forth as part of a race equity action plan based on the pulse check findings.
Yeah, appreciate that, Kay. And I think the only thing that I would just add on top of that is we also provide you with a list of resources to be able to, further your learning and development. And among those resources, we offer just recommendations for external support consultants who can help carry the work further as well. Have about 4 minutes left. I think we can take maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
There may be other questions. I did want to address something that Laura put in the chat. So you mentioned holding space for ourselves, the team. That's an important thing for you all to be thinking about. Because when we coach folks as part of a cohort, sometimes it is about holding space for the people who are part of that team, given the challenges that they're having outside of this group of individuals. So developing a race equity action plan, like setting forth some goals, that's one process that we can support you in. And then the other process is like the human interpersonal side of it. And as you go about developing a race equity action plan, and planning for the work that you want to carry out based on the pulse check, it's important that you continue to be intentional about those 2 different threads. So what is the work that you're leading? How does it show up in terms of some formal goals? But then also, what support are the people leading the work receiving so that they can continue to do the work? Because it's very emotionally demanding. And we can hold space for both, but it's important to be clear about what you need and why.
Yeah, thanks, Kay. And anytime we hold space, we try and be intentional with the ways in which we establish working learning environment agreements and how we clarify level set around key terminologies. And so we hope that our model for holding space is something that can be replicated in your respective organizations as well. Okay. Wow, that was a lot. And I'm really glad that we just had so much engagement today. And again, thank you all for making the time and for your interest in participating. We're super excited about the Race Equity Cycle Pulse Check Cohort and for the opportunity to potentially collaborate with you all to advance racial equity at your respective organizations. Just a reminder that we are going to send a follow-up email this Thursday, and it's going to include a recording of today's call. It will include a written frequently asked questions document that will include the questions you all raised in today's call. And it will also include the link to the application, which again goes live this Thursday and is due August 18th at the end of day. Another reminder that we're going to have an application office hour that's happening August 2nd from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. So hope to see you all there as well. And if you have any questions at all that you thought of after leaving here today, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll put my email in the chat once more for you. And so happy to continue the conversation there. And so with that, just thank you all again. Really a pleasure to be with you all, and hopefully looking forward to reviewing your submitted applications. Thanks for throwing that in the chat, Mar. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Wishing you all a pleasant and productive week. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.